Your hosts are here, Sammie and Michelle. By the end of this podcast, you'll know them well. Adulting, navigating the journey of life. Careers to relationships, pain and strife. Put down the rule book, rethink the status quo. If there's another direction you wanna go, find purpose, passion and mastery in all that you do with Status Post-Adulting.
Hey, Status Post-Adulting family! This is Sammie
and Michelle.
And you're listening to the 87th episode of Status Post-Adulting, where we are continuing our conversation on Sparketypes.
That's right, Sammie. In case you haven't yet, we definitely encourage you to take the Sparketype quiz, which we are going to share in our show notes. But we are excited to talk about the second half of the Sparketypes: the sage, the scientist, the advocate, the nurturer, and the essentialist.
And for those of you who may have missed last week's episode, let me just real quick review what a Sparketype is. Sparketypes is a concept that was created by Jonathan Fields based off of research and data that he did, which found that people can generally be put into 10 primary different archetypes, which are based on what lights someone up, like what kind of work, what kind of activity lights up an individual.
That's exactly right, Sammie. And Jonathan Fields, he wrote the book Sparked. He has a podcast, Sparked. He has a podcast called The Good Life. If you are interested in your Sparketype or learning more about these ideas around how to just work in a more meaningful way that really lights you up, we fully encourage you to dive into his work because we really enjoyed the book, and I have been listening to the podcast. I think, Sammie, you have as well. And I have been loving it. Like, it's really inspired me in a lot of different ways.
That's right, Michelle. Finding out what my Sparketypes were really, really validated how I felt about doing certain activities. One, how I felt about the activities that I loved, and two, how I felt about activities that I didn't like. It just reiterated to me that there are activities that innately I love and innately are just harder for me to do. And that brings us to the three main categories that you'll get once you take your Sparketype quiz, which is your primary Sparketype. That's the Sparketype that is most like you. You have your shadow Sparketype, which is on the quiz, it's the one that you test in the affirmative the second most, but it is really the Sparketype that supports your primary Sparketype. And then there's also the anti. The anti is a Sparketype that you resonate with the least. It'll be the heaviest lift, the hardest for you to do those kind of activities. Even if you're good at them, even if you have to do them all the time, they're just the activities that you like the least.
That's exactly right, Sammie. Another piece of vocab that we'll be using is service versus processed Sparketypes. Some Sparketypes are more service-oriented, more about the people and helping people. And process is more about the doing, the structure, the organization behind the Sparketype. I think it makes a lot of sense in context of each one, and so we'll highlight which ones fall under service versus process.
Exactly, Michelle. And our first Sparketype for today is the Sage. Slogan: I awaken insight.
The Sage, first off, I have to say, to me it sounds like the coolest sounding Sparketype. Sage just sounds so wise, but it is exactly what it sounds like. A sage is someone who their goal is to illuminate, enlighten, share knowledge, and see that light bulb go on when they are teaching you something. A sage is really somebody who finds happiness and joy in being able to teach.
Yes, Michelle. Sages are like the motivational speakers. They want to inspire people. They want to motivate people to change their lives or just help them grow. Like, they just really get pleasure out of seeing people learn and get inspired.
Exactly, Sammie. This seems like a really good point to make a clarification. A sage and an advisor can sound very similar. An advisor from our last episode is somebody who really likes to coach, have that one-on-one interaction with somebody, and help them get to whatever their next step is. A sage is more about somebody who wants to teach, make sure that you understand actually the information behind that info. A sage is someone who would be happy as like a professor in front of a class and being able to teach multiple students, versus an advisor, I think, is somebody who is more motivated by that one-on-one or small group coaching.
That's a good distinction, Michelle. And me and you have a sage in our lives.
Oh, yes, we do. And if you listen to this podcast, you may have that same sage in your life as well.
Very true. In fact, that sage may have recommended the podcast to you, in which case we are extremely grateful for that sage.
Also classic sage.
Also classic sage. And this sage is our dearest Mumsy.
Mom, Schemer.
Sophie.
Our mom is a sage, and she could not be more quintessential sage.
She's so sagey.
She's so sagey. She loves teaching. And as a kid / an adult, let me tell you, any moment is a teaching moment. Any moment can change into a lecture at any point in time. But she really loves teaching, and she loves to be able to help people and like share her knowledge.
And it's not just teaching, Michelle. It's really about inspiration. Like, it's not about going into the details of like a mathematical process. It's about inspiring you and making you want to be motivated to make a change in your life. Actually, it's a great characteristic for a parent.
Yeah, it really is.
Convenient for us.
Something interesting about sages, Sammie, is that a lot of times, sometimes your sage urge comes ASAP. So let's say you're learning something. You don't necessarily have to feel like you have to be a master in the topic before you can go and help teach other people. So let's say you're in a study group and you have, read the last chapter. You're eager to go and share that knowledge and be able to help your peers. The interesting thing is, sometimes there's also what Jonathan Fields refers to as a self-worth spiral of doom. Like, there's this conflict between, do I need to know enough? Am I there yet? Do I have the knowledge? Do I have the right to teach people? It's essentially this feeling of doubting yourself a little bit. And you don't need to be an absolute master, sages, to be able to share info. And a lot of times that desire to share will come before you're a master. Because honestly, being a master takes time.
And it's interesting that you bring that up, because I think about when my mom learned about financial independence and retiring early. She came with me to a fire meetup in the Bay Area. And whereas I love to just like dig into all the fire stuff and the financial stuff, just like for pure knowledge sake, my mom definitely likes learning it so that she can then inspire other people.
Oh yeah, I remember that meeting. This is like the first time she heard about financial independence. And she's like going on teaching them about different things.
Mm-hmm. And immediately after this first meeting, she wanted to tell everybody about it. And not in the same way like I want to tell everybody about it, because that's the thing I'm most excited about and I just can't stop talking about it. For her, it's really because she wants to inspire everybody around her.
Yeah, she found this information and now she wants other people to understand it as well. Moving on, Sammie, the next Sparketype is the scientist. And the slogan for the scientist is, I figure things out.
That's right, Michelle. And the scientist could literally be a scientist, because scientists are people who do research, figure things out, come to solutions for problems. Or they could be people in a lot of other settings, in business settings, in tech settings, in healthcare settings, where they are trying to find solutions to problems that may not require the stereotypical scientific research.
That's so true, Sammie. The core of a scientist is really interesting because it's somebody who is looking for these burning questions. They see problems everywhere, and they have an urge to go find those problems and work on a solution. They like puzzles. They take things apart when they're a kid, and as an adult, they want to understand how things work and also how to find a solution to a problem. The more complex, the better.
In fact, a lot of times scientists can pair with Maven. Again, one of the most common Sparketypes is the Maven, the learner. Scientists whose shadows are Mavens, they like to learn so they can use that knowledge to then solve problems. Unlike a pure Maven like myself who just wants to learn, the scientist Maven will use that knowledge to solve problems.
Yes, Amy. And this is a very process-driven Sparketype. And what's interesting with scientists is they love solving the problem. And then when the problem is solved, they want to find another problem. They don't necessarily feel like, oh, I'm done. I solved this issue. E equals MC squared. I'm good. Like they are on to the next one. And they see problems everywhere, which is so interesting. So they're the type of people that if you talk to them and you come to them with a problem, they're probably going to give you a solution.
Mm-hmm. You know how sometimes you go to talk to people and you just want them to listen to you? This is not that person. They will tell you what to do.
Mm-hmm. And it's a really helpful trait. It's good to have people in your life who are more about deconstructing an issue and trying to find the solution to the puzzle, as we say.
Our next Sparketype, Michelle, is the advocate.
The advocate.
Slogan, I am your champion.
I am your champion.
Advocates literally like to advocate for other people. They want to stand up for people. Advocate is actually our mom's shadow Sparketype. So she is a sage, likes to provide insight to people, but she's also an advocate, which we can see all the time. Because if she ever sees an underserved or discriminated against group, she is the first to advocate for them. She loves doing it.
Exactly. She is exactly what they say about advocates, which is about shining your light, amplifying, championing everything from a person, a community, a population, even an ideal or an idea. Like an advocate is somebody who they are going to go and they're going to fight the good fight.
And Michelle, advocate is actually my anti-Sparketype.
Oof. The apple falls far from the tree.
The apple couldn't fall further in this case. When I learned this in my Sparketype quiz, let me tell you, I just felt so seen because I really understood that I get super drained by being an advocate. It's something I have to do at my work a lot. And I think because I know that I don't want to do that advocate role, I'm extra careful in making sure that I do pick up on situations that I have to advocate. Whether that means that I have to help my patient get a sooner appointment with their specialist when it was scheduled for 3 months out and it's really much more urgent than that, or it means doing something more dramatic like calling Child Protective Services or Adult Protective Services. These tasks really drain me. And I think part of the reason that the advocate drains me is I can just consider everybody else's point of view. Like I know that specialist is super busy and it's going to be super hard for them to get someone in next week. I know that, these family situations are more complicated than they seem. And just because I'm calling the police or calling CPS doesn't mean the situation is going to be resolved. And I can't even guarantee that this person is going to end up in a better situation. I think for me, the advocacy is just so draining because I see all the sides and it's just such a heavy lift for me.
Yeah, and that's actually a really interesting point that you bring up, Sammie, because one thing I really liked in the book, Sparked, Jonathan Fields talks about this question of who carries the burden of advocacy. Because yes, there are these people in our world who they like to advocate for people. It brings them alive. Like they see these issues and they feel the urge to go out and fight for people. But it is, regardless of whether or not you're a Sparketype, it is very draining. It's deeply emotional typically. It's a lot of times high stakes. And this is one of those Sparketypes where I think it's very easy too to be like, oh, people like to do advocacy. That's what brings them alive. They can just do it. Or in your case, there are people who work these jobs and so they can focus on advocacy and I don't have to care about it. And I think it does bring up this question of how much do we let these people lead that charge and how much do we get involved ourselves? And so obviously it's a really big question, but I did think it was a really interesting one because advocacy in its nature, I think is so difficult. And I think regardless of whether or not you find it a high lift or not. It is something that all of us individually do have to consider, like, hey, I shouldn't necessarily kick the can down the road because I think somebody else is going to take care of it. Because there are so many issues out there and people and communities and ideas that need advocacy. Just something to think about.
Yeah, Michelle, I can see that. Our next Sparketype is also a very service-driven Sparketype, and it is the Nurturer.
The Nurturer. Slogan, Sammie, I've got you.
I got you.
I've got you.
The Nurturer likes to take care of people, offer support for people. They're generally very empathetic people. They want to ease people's suffering.
Yes. In a very hands-on way, too. I think a nurturer is one that I assume a lot of people, you can probably think of somebody who's a nurturer in your life. Like, this is just somebody who, to me, it's like the person who's going to like wrap you in a hug. Like, they're going to hear your problems. Like, they genuinely care. They genuinely see you. They hear you. They understand your problems. And they are just there to provide empathy. They're there to give themselves to you to be able to help take care of you, basically. Or an animal, or an idea, or a community, but they are all about nurturing.
It's true, Michelle. And the Nurturer is the most service-driven Sparketype that is on the Sparketype list.
Mm-hmm.
Michelle and I were briefly talking about hacking the Sparketype quiz at the last episode, and I did take the Sparketype quiz just to see what my third one would be, if I did have a third one, and I found out that it was the Nurturer. And I was really reassured because my first two Sparketypes are very process-driven, and I did find that there was something missing because I'm like, there is an aspect of my job. Like, I love seeing people like improve. I love like caring for people in a way. And when I saw that Nurture was actually number 3, then it kind of made sense that that part of my job I do enjoy.
Oh, okay, Sammie. Your job? Let's talk about the fact, guys, listen to me. Last week, Sammie comes home from the gym, okay? And she is distraught. She actually calls me from the gym because there is a dog outside who she feels is way too hot, like panting.
He's suffering.
And she could not handle the suffering of this dog. And that's great. She's a good person. But my point is that she, weirdly, you would never guess this, but she is super empathetic towards animals. And she like went into the gym. She got water for the dog. She like let it drink out of her water bottle. I'm just like on the opposite side of here. Like, you know, I'm probably not telling the story from the most empathetic place. But also keep in mind, she called me and I was like, come home. And she was like, no, the dog is following my car and I don't know what to do.
The dog was literally following me for like a block or two. And then I felt bad because I'm like, this dog is like following me in the heat while I'm in my car. Like, so upsetting.
Literally, she could barely talk to me when she came home. I think because I also told her, we are not taking this dog in. We cannot start taking in strays in this town. No offense, there's tons of them. Okay? But let's say we bring in one. Next thing you know, our whole backyard is filled with doggies.
And let me be clear, I am not necessarily someone who's pro-domestication of animals because domestication of humans has already resulted in so many problems for humans. And I don't necessarily see the need to do the same thing to animals. But there are situations like a dog in the heat that, you know, maybe a little air conditioner would be nice.
I put a hard stop on that. Sammie, finding out that she might have Nurturer in her top Sparketypes definitely rang true. But what rings more true is actually Sammie's Shadow Sparketype, which, to recap, she is a Maven first and foremost. But this last Sparketype, the Essentialist, is Sammie's Shadow.
The Essentialist is my shadow. The slogan for the Essentialist is, I create order from chaos. Chaos. Let me tell you guys, finding out that Essentialist was my shadow Sparketype, so insightful. Essentialists are the type of people who like to create order, whether that's color organizing their closet, organizing their meal prep, taking confusing concepts or protocols and organizing them and tying them up with a nice, neat little bow. That is the Essentialist.
And, Sammie, my anti is Essentialist.
Convenient.
Which makes a lot of sense because The thought of taking something that has no structure, it's complete chaos, and then like organizing it, like literally gives me hives. Not literally. Figuratively gives me hives.
It's true.
And I'm not alone, Sammie. They say that for essentialists, Jonathan Fields talks about this, it's like everyone else hates doing the essentialist work. And so an essentialist will always be employed because they're the person in the office that they're going to get ish done. And they're going to organize it. They're going to create a structure and a process. And they will be the backbone of your organization.
It's true, Michelle. I think for a non-essentialist, the fact that people get joy out of doing these things is shocking. For example, I love cleaning, and people will always say to me, oh yeah, I love stress cleaning. Or yes, if I'm, in a bad mood or something, maybe I'll like to clean. I'm like, no, I love cleaning all the time. I could spend days cleaning, and it would bring me so much joy because I just love seeing how wonderful everything looks afterwards. And I think there's also just like this idea of like trying to decide how everything will be perfectly cleaned is also very enjoyable to me. When we talk about Sparketypes being something innate to you, this is something I have seen since my childhood. I would love organizing the home when my parents were gone during summer vacation. I just loved, I've loved cleaning and being orderly for a long time. And I hate when things get disorganized.
Yeah, sometimes when I do Sammie's laundry and I want her to notice, I'll put things in the wrong spot because I know that she's more likely to find her shirts and stuff if I put it way on the wrong side.
Yes. And let me just tell you, I actually did notice that you did my laundry last week or the other week because the way she puts things on the hanger, it's like she doesn't care that it's evenly aligned on the hanger. Like she just puts it on the hanger and it could be all the shoulder parts be all crumpled up on the hanger. And I saw that and I thought I've never even considered being this reckless with hanging the clothes. But people see things differently.
Let me tell you guys, I do a lot of things for my sister in terms of chores and stuff. I look out for her.
She really does.
And I used to try to mimic her format, and I would just get still yelled at. And the reality is that a lot of times it would just be kind of confusing for her. But what I realized is that if I do it extremely wrong, she'll immediately address it. So that's just how I go about it.
The essentialist tendency I see in other things too. For example, I love writing, but nonfiction writing. I love reading a book or a journal article and then distilling that information in a really useful way.
Oh my gosh, almost like a podcast.
Almost like a podcast, yes. And whenever I tell people about my love of writing, they always think that I'm talking about fantasy or creative writing, which I couldn't even fathom enjoying. I'm like, no, I'm 100% talking about analytical or nonfiction writing.
Sammie, that is so true. I remember when you had a stream of consciousness exercise as a young kid and you numbered your random thoughts.
Yes, everybody was writing a big paragraph and my thoughts were in number bulleted list. It's just ingrained in who you are. And even at my job, being a Maven, I love learning new things. So if I get an interesting patient or something like that, that's my favorite thing is learning about them. And then my number 2 favorite thing is organizing things to help them reach their goals. So I think incidentally, even though maybe both of my 2 top Sparketypes, my primary and my shadow, are on the process side of things, because they kind of line up with my job pretty well, I still enjoy what would otherwise probably be considered a super service-driven job.
Yeah, Sammie, that makes a lot of sense to me. It's interesting with Sparketypes. I think now that we've covered all of them, something that Sammie and I realized when we first did the Sparketype quiz and we found out our Sparketypes, Sammie is a Maven Essentialist. I am a Performer Maven Anti-Essentialist. We looked at our responsibilities with the podcast, and I do a lot of the back-end work because Sammie's working all day. She has to come home. She has to do her notes. So I edit the podcast. I produce the podcast. I get everything ready for us. And taking the quiz was actually really, really helpful because we had this moment where we were like, wow, we are in opposite positions.
Mm-hmm.
Sammie loves to create process and structure and put all of that together for us. And I love to show up and perform and talk. And it's convenient. We're both Mavens. Shocker that this podcast is us talking about things that we learn. But it was actually really helpful because we could be like, okay, that's just the truth of it. And for me to be like, okay, actually, this is a heavy lift for me. Like, I'm not a lazy person who hates to do these things. But actually, if I just focus on it and put it together and create a system, I'm happy because we can just pop it on and record it. And that's just how it is. We can't change any of that right now. And I don't know, just knowing our Sparketypes made it that much easier to be like, this is why it's difficult for us to do our certain roles. Because in some ways, the ideal would maybe be that we were flipped.
I agree, Michelle. It was really interesting to learn what our Sparketypes were. I think, both of us combined, we have 2 great set of Sparketypes for a podcast. But you're right, like me being the one working and then having to be the one just to like come in and record a podcast once a week, that would actually be something you'd be better at because you're the performer. And then on the other hand, you're having to, be at home and organize everything and plan everything and kind of create all the to-do list type stuff for the podcast. And that's something I would actually be better at because I'm the essentialist. And so right now we're both kind of not in our ideal roles. It's kind of nice to just be able to acknowledge that for now. Like we really can't change it that much right now, but just knowing that we're both having to do a little bit of a heavier lift and maybe things are not ideal because we're not in alignment with our Sparketype 100%.
Yeah, exactly, Sammie. And Jonathan Fields says, like, your anti doesn't have to be something that you're bad at. I think it's just helpful to know, like, hey, okay, I don't have to be happy 100% of the time, but if I could turn it on for these 30 minutes, we can produce a beautiful episode of Status Plus Adulting for all of y'all.
And most importantly, we were both Mavens, so as long as we're getting to learn something, we are reasonably happy.
Yes, that is very, very true, Sammie. So, for takeaways, we have covered 2 episodes worth of Sparketypes. This episode, we covered the Sage, I Awaken Insights, Scientist, I Figure Things Out, the Advocate, I Am Your Champion, the Nurturer, I've Got You, and the Essentialist, I Create Order from Chaos.
And last episode, we covered the Maven, I Live to Learn, the Maker, I Make Ideas Manifest, the Warrior, I Gather and Lead People, the Advisor, I Guide to Grow, and the Performer, I Turn Moments into Magic.
Exactly. And these Sparketypes that Jonathan Fields spent a decade researching, discovering, putting together this content has been so helpful for us in terms of looking at the different things that we do and how we can turn up, for me, my Performer and my Maven, and how Sammie can turn up her Essentialist and her Maven. And it's just been so helpful, and we hope that knowing your Sparketype, hopefully you took the quiz, you should definitely take the quiz if you haven't already, knowing your Sparketype actually just lets you free a little bit to be like, you know what, this is what I like to do, how can I do more of it in my life?
Yeah, Michelle, that's exactly right. And it's good to look at your jobs or different activities that you do and see what matches your Sparketype and maybe what doesn't match your Sparketype. Or maybe where is your anti popping up in the work that you have to do? Is there a way that you can actually readjust things in your workplace to make it so that you don't have to do so much of that anti work and you can do more of that primary and shadow work? Because that might make it so that you feel less burned out at work.
Which the interesting thing is, Sammie, Jonathan Fields, he literally starts his book off by saying, do not blow up your job. Do not leave anything. Don't make any crazy decisions when you find out your Sparketype, which I get it. I understand. Obviously, it's difficult to make change, but he does say this, and I think we should point it out. Mm-hmm. Jonathan Fields does think that you should not quit your job or make any major changes because of your Sparketypes.
I agree. You know what? Homeboy, I don't know if he's hired by the Matrix or what, but he tells you what you love. He tells you what you don't love. And the next thing you know, he's all about staying at your job and trying to make it work. He emphasizes this so hard. And I don't know who's paying him or why he has to do that, but his big message is don't quit your job. With that said, me, Sammie, my personal opinion, I think that if you see a way to make yourself align with your Sparketypes more, I just really feel like the more you do the work that is in alignment with your Sparketype, whether that's paid or whether that's as a hobby, you will just excel at that like exponentially, because that's the stuff that resonates with you. That's the stuff that like other people maybe will never be able to be as good at as you, because you just love it. You'll do it all the time because you love it. Like it's not work for you. It's actually pleasure. So it's something that you're just naturally going to become good and successful at.
I totally agree, Sammie. And I'll add to that too. Another big thing I realized with Sparketypes is that chances are you're going to have to do a different version of all of these things. There are times in my work where I need to be a sage or a maven or an advocate or a nurturer or an essentialist. You get the point. You can't have a perfect day where you're performing all day and other people are doing the other work. Maybe. We're not there yet though. But I think it's helpful to know, and it's okay to be like, okay, maybe I don't like putting together a calendar every week for us. But I also know that that's something that's going to help us be successful and reach my ultimate goal. So chances are you're going to have to do the good stuff. You're going to have to do the bad stuff. And I agree with Sammie. If you can align what you're doing with your Sparketype in some capacity, it is going to be like pouring gasoline on a fire. Like you are just going to go off because you're doing the thing that you love to do. You're naturally going to want to be the best at it.
Exactly, Michelle. And we are curious. If you took the Sparketype quiz and you know what your Sparketype is, let us know. You can DM us on Instagram or email us at statuspostadulting@gmail.com. We are so curious. Let us know what's your Sparketype and how does that reflect in your life? How does that reflect in your work? And what's your anti? What's the thing that doesn't light you up? It's just so interesting to see how everybody's Sparketype presents in a different way.
Yes. Send it to us. I've already started creating a spreadsheet of the people I know and their Sparketypes. I would love to include yours. I haven't even told my friends yet because I wanted them to listen to this episode first, if I'm being honest. But we are so into Sparketypes right now, so send us yours. We would love to hear it.
It's true, Michelle. I would say that the Sparketype is the one thing that I did this year that I found the most insightful. So if you haven't already, take the Sparketype quiz. It is going to be so validating and you will feel so seen when you do it. And also tell us what your Sparketype is.
Yes, we will also see you.
And most importantly, be sure to join us next week as we put down the rule book and we rethink the status quo.
Hi guys, welcome to our after show.
Hello.
We hope that you have enjoyed our chatter about the Sparketypes. We really enjoyed the topic and hopefully you got something out of it. Now for our after show, we just chat a little bit, give you an update on our lives, talk a little bit about what's going on. And Sammie, today I have a fun little game for us if you're interested.
Oh my God, I'm excited.
Yes. Okay. So for some background, guys, I am very plugged in. I love the news, the pop culture, everything that's going on. I know way too much about the world. Sammie is a busy woman. She does not know all of the headlines in the world.
I really don't. I
thought a fun game for us is for you and for the audience. I pulled 3 headlines, 2 real and 1 fake. And I want you to guess which one the fake headline is.
Okay, exciting. Do you see how she's a Maven performer, people? Sorry, performer Maven. Okay, this is a performance after her Maven activities.
So true. So true. And I think my inspiration for this was the Morning Brew newsletter. They do this like once a week, so shout out to Morning Brew. All right. So these are the 3 headlines, and I intentionally chose podcast-related ones because we are a podcast. First headline. Kim Kardashian is starting a true crime podcast. Second headline. Twitter is launching a podcast app. Third headline. Queen Elizabeth has actually recorded a podcast last year, which will be released. I don't know this word. I don't know how to say it. I thought it was posthumously, and then I realized it's wrong. Posthumously. Oh my gosh. I regret. Released after her death. You know what word I'm talking about?
Maybe.
Posthumously.
Posthumously, naturally, of course.
Kim Kardashian is starting a true crime podcast. Twitter is launching a podcast app. Queen Elizabeth is launching a podcast posthumous after her death.
I do know Queen Elizabeth is dead.
Yes.
And given that posthumously was hard for you to pronounce, I'm going to say that one's true. How many are true again?
Sorry, 2 are true, 1 is fake.
I do love Kim. And she's a lawyer, so she might do a crime podcast. Twitter, creating a podcast app.
Mm-hmm.
I just feel like if either of those happened, you would tell me, but you didn't tell me. You kept it a secret, I guess.
Uh-huh.
Twitter is releasing a podcast app?
You think that's real or fake?
Real. I think it's real.
All right. Drum roll, please. The fake headline is Queen Elizabeth is not releasing a podcast posthumously.
Where do you get these words that you don't know how to pronounce? This is one thing about Michelle's Maven ability. She's all about the books, okay? But she's not in reality where people are talking about these things. So there's actually a lot of words Michelle does not know how to pronounce correctly.
This is true.
I'm unfamiliar with this word.
Posthumously. Posthumous. Oh my gosh. Yeah, Sammie's right. I saw a tweet that was like, you can tell someone read a lot as a child because they know all these big words and they never pronounce them correctly. And that's literally me all the time. And Sammie's always correcting me. But I kind of knew that might trick you.
You tricked me for real. Oh my God. But now I'm so excited. Kim has a podcast?
Yeah, she's launching a true crime podcast.
Oh my God. I'm so excited.
Yeah. I mean, anything, she has like $1 bajillion. So anything she does is going to be great. And it's going to be like the #1 true crime podcast probably.
And you know what? The true crime space is a space to be in when it comes to podcast.
Oh, yeah. It's competitive and people love their true crime.
Mm-hmm.
Do you listen to true crime podcasts?
I listen to Serial. I don't listen to a lot of...
The OG true crime podcast?
The OG true crime podcast, that's correct. And then Twitter is creating a podcast app. Interesting. Yeah. A new platform for us to be a first mover on.
Mm-hmm, exactly. I guess they have an app, which I forget the name of the app. It's like Signs or Signals or something. But they're like starting to test and incorporate like podcasting in it. It's basically like Clubhouse, like it's a little audio app right now. And so, yeah, they might be launching a podcast app soon.
Well, that's really exciting.
And unfortunately, Queen Elizabeth, as far as I know, did not record a podcast before her death.
It makes sense. But she is dead. And I did know that.
Yes, you did. Our mom texted us as soon as it happened. So
yeah, she texted us a lot of stuff about it.
Yeah, she's very into it. Anyway, thanks for listening, guys.
Thank you. See you next week.